Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here today with two very nice colleagues here in the European Parliament, two members of Parliament, a lady from Bulgaria and a gentleman from the Czech Republic. And we are going to discuss a huge number of interesting subjects. From Bulgaria, Mrs. Rada Lajkova is here from the Europe of Sovereign Nations group, and she's going to discuss with us a little bit the situation in Bulgaria, the euro, and other interesting subjects. And with Andrei Dostal, we are going to also to examine a little bit the consequences of EU sanctions on normal people, what it means for normal people when their country is under sanctions. I think this is also a very important and interesting subject. Maybe we start with you, if you allow. We had recently the introduction in Bulgaria of the euro, and this was a lot of discussion. I think it was a long and difficult process. But what does that mean now for Bulgaria? I know that the Commission has maintained before the introduction of the euro that this would not lead to any inflation, for instance. Now, Rada, what is the situation nowadays in Bulgaria with the euro?
Thank you, Fernand, for this question, and it is especially important for me as a member here of the Economics Committee, because what I saw in the European Parliament is actually that it really overrides its own rules, and especially in this type of serious decision that will change the future for generations of my compatriots in Bulgaria, because we know it is now proven that the data that the Bulgarian government provided, the so-called budget deficit criteria, which has to be 3% maximum, there is this so-called Maastricht criteria, the European Union stipulated them in the Lisbon treaties. Well, this whole data unfortunately was not fulfilled by Bulgaria, and nevertheless this parliament adopted a decision, adopted a report with a rapporteur, with a person from the same government party, which doesn't mean anything for the distribution of powers, the three pillars of power. There is no checks and balances. So the reality now in my country is that inflation is really over the top. It has direct political consequences as well, because this government, this coalition is now over. We are looking to new elections in April in Bulgaria. And the euro is really a very political project, I would say, not an economic project.
It's nothing new, actually, because when we had the introduction of the euro in Greece, we had a very similar situation. We introduced the euro in Greece, and after the introduction, everybody discovered that actually Greece did not fulfill the criteria. But as with Bulgaria, it was a political decision to admit Greece anyway to the eurozone, and after some time we had then some huge problems, and Greece is still suffering from the consequences. So I hope that Bulgaria is not going to experience a similar situation. But you are also not dealing only with the euro and the introduction of the euro, but you are also interested in another question of which you are shadow rapporteur, and that is the digital euro. So the next stage, the introduction of the digital euro and all the concerns that we might have with that. Will there still be cash money? You are one of the specialists here in the Parliament actually on the digital euro. So what is your take now? What should we expect from that?
I think this is a very important subject that a lot of citizens don't even hear about, because it's been decided on the run really very quickly. The European Central Bank says we have to have a decision and adoption in speedy time. And right now, when we have not really a lot of trust in the political elites in Europe, such a fundamental change in the way the financial system operates is really dangerous. Dangerous for democratic participation of the citizens, because it's not just a fancy gadget, it's not like PayPal or something else. It is something that gives really more power to the European Central Bank. It's completely centralized, and it's related also to possibility to make money programmable, to make smart contracts in your digital wallet. We also have the digital identity now that's developed at the same time. So these are things that are going to change the life of our citizens in Europe. And as a shadow rapporteur, I have the option to make amendments, which means a little bit to milder the effect. And for us, it's important that cash stays legal tender in Europe, that it can be used anywhere, and there is no ever more exceptions that it's diminished, that the merchant doesn't accept it, or there is no ATM. We know that there a lot of ATM, a lot of cash machines have been removed. So it is like a circle that goes in something that's related to basic rights, because having analog life is a right for the citizens.
Can we perhaps explain a little bit what you mean when you say programmable money? So would it be possible, for instance, if I had the digital euro and I would like to buy something from, for instance, from China, that the euro is programmed in a way that would not allow me to do such a transaction? Or what do we understand with a programmable money? So you are not your own master anymore, what you can do with your money, but there would be some decision by, for instance, the central bank or somebody else who would decide what you can buy with your money or what you cannot buy with your money. Is that what we have to understand when we say programmable money?
In the beginning, this is not explicitly put in the document, but we have something called smart contracts. And what do we use money for? We use it for paying, we use it for transactions. And these smart contracts are very much programmable. And they come in the form of something very handy for people, something that we like to use because we don't have to go to, say, the notary or somewhere else. They're some conditions that are fulfilled, and then this smart contract is already into place. So there is the technical programmability. So it means, as we know from the past, the EU creates or self-proclaims a lot of crises. There is a crisis in the economy, so we can do common debt. There is a crisis, there is a war, so more debt. There is a crisis of COVID. So if the next crisis comes, I just have to ask as opposition, how are these instruments going to be applied from the people in power?
That's indeed a very good statement, and because the European Union is now used to declare state of emergencies, crises, and so on, and then takes decisions. But isn't it also a worry once you have the digital money that at some moment it would be decided, that money can be blocked in a way, that you can be debanked or that you cannot use that money anymore because you might have political views, for instance, that are not tolerated by the European Commission, so with a growing intolerance that we have in the European institutions. Is there a risk that suddenly your account, your wallet in digital euros would be blocked by the Commission or some authority?
The Commission doesn't put this as explicit, but it gives the technical possibility in the way that this program is going to be developed. And we know that the EU loves to put strategic priorities. For example, green agenda, climate is strategic priority. Now rearm Europe, buying more arms. So they also speak about putting some of the savings into these strategic priorities. So we don't know what can happen if the technical possibility is there, if the establishment decides that this is very important and strategical, so we have to make it that way that the money flows in one direction.
Well, this is quite intriguing, I must admit, but André, you are also dealing with such questions, like, for instance, debanking and human rights and so on. Now, if I would like to challenge you, I would now say that the European Commission is a very, very good institution, that it always applies human rights, that we are models worldwide, never infringing on the rights of anybody, and so that we do not have to be concerned in any way. The money is not in danger, our freedom is assured by the European institutions. And now I ask you, do you agree with that, or do you have a different experience?
Well, I do have a different experience because politics is generally an issue of trust into the leaders. In past, as our viewers already know, we had a great king from Luxembourg, Charles IV of Czech Republic, and we trusted him well, and we basically did what he told, and it was good for us. In case of Commission of Ursula von der Leyen, we are not so sure. We still have a currency which is, by the way, called also a crown. And we say we are keeping the crown because we want to have the sovereignty. We don't want to be the whim of some issues which happen with the common currency, and this is not going in the good direction right now.
But when we are talking, let's go back to the issue of human rights and protection. If now in the European Union we know that sanctions are being taken against individuals, so I come back to that issue. Are there now in the European Union people who are suddenly not able anymore to use their money, who are deprived of their basic rights, and what kind of experience do you have with such situations? I know that there is a list of such people.
A very bad experience, and this is one of the big reasons for my mistrust in the current government of the EU. It is not government, but the leaders. They are not leaders anyway, but the people upside. Now it happened that without any court proceedings, they just told that some even citizens of the EU who were writing to the internet things which were not to the liking of the European Commission were banned from traveling, from using their own money. They could not defend themselves at a court. They even didn't know it before the punishment actually happened. And this is completely contrary to the human rights conventions we have, such as the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yeah, thank you very much, because I'm very appreciative also of the efforts that you and other colleagues make also to help these people. And I think that is exactly also the risk that you, or the reality that you describe, Andre, corresponds to the risks that you see rather in your work, because you say it's possible, it's not admitted by the Commission that these possibilities exist, but actually we see in the cases that you are dealing with, Andre, that they do exactly that kind of actions. And basically, you know, it does not correspond to any human rights standards. They do not even have a realistic possibility of defending themselves when this happens.
This is perfectly right, and this is why we challenged the European Commission in a letter which all our friends signed, and the Commission replied in a way which is absurd. That they basically told that if you are punished, then you might go to the court and then challenge the punishment. So in the European Convention on Human Rights, you have the right to have a fair trial, and only then, if you are found guilty, be punished. Lion is writing us with Kalas that first you are punished, and then you might go to court and perhaps ask if the punishment was good. This is completely unacceptable.
I think that is absolutely outrageous, because normally if somebody wants to punish you for something, you have to go to court. And here there is no court, there is no defense, no possibility of defense before being sentenced. And I think it's particularly perverse that they, in their text, they do not even say it's a punishment. It's like an education measure that you get. So it's not penal law. They help you to understand that you have behaved wrongly. They're very kind to us, actually. They help us to understand that we have to change our attitude and in the future be supportive of the Commission, because the Commission is always right. It's like big sister, you know, from the lion. That's the kind of impression that I get from that.
This is very scary. It is like from a dystopian novel from past, and it is now happening. And this is why I am quite afraid of the digital currency, because their willingness to educate us for our own good could have no barriers. For instance, I'm a health lawyer, and we were discussing it in the past. So if they see from some communication from our smartwatch that the amount of fat in our blood vessels is too high, they will not allow us to use the currency to buy another pizza. They would tell, well, next time, tomorrow, not today.
So one of the many reasons I love just discussing with the two of you is that you are both coming from countries that have a recent experience with dictatorship. Bulgaria and the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia in those days, you both have experienced these communist times. And I'm always interested in then understanding, how do you feel nowadays when you see what happens with the Commission, the risk that we are running perhaps with a digital euro or now with sanctions applied to citizens. Do you compare this when you listen to this? Do you compare that to the experiences that your countries had previously, or do you still consider that this is really a haven of democracy, and you would never think of comparing communist times with what we have now, the evolutions that we have now inside the European Union?
It's very interesting you mentioned that, Fernand, because I think there is a lot of parallels. And if you look at how the propaganda machine functions right now, it really resembles what used to be the case in communist times, with the small booklets that were filled with the prescription of how to behave, what to say, what not to say. Now we're experiencing it in our social life. Even normal people, if they express an opinion, if they have some views, they can be cancelled in society, in the company they're working for. And a lot of commentators have said that the EU is turning in EU SSSR because of the way it's functioning and doesn't allow any different voice. So this is everything else but democracy.
And you, Andrei, what is your opinion on this? Do you have a tendency to compare nowadays European Union with experiences from the past, or do you still see that it is a very different thing?
I would say that it can be even worse due to the tools, digital tools, for instance, which in current society exist and in past didn't exist. In Czechoslovakia, perhaps it was slightly better than in other countries. We were never a complete totality. Of course, if you were a dissident and you were trying to oppose the governing party's positions, it could be hard for you. But for the great majority of people, the government just didn't care about their private lives and what they are doing. And it was quite common to make fun of the communists among the people, and nothing big really happened. It was not a free society with free elections, of course, but still nobody told you when you can go out with the dog and when not, which we lived through in the COVID times.
So really, I think that's also a very good point. With all the digital and electronic ways of surveillance that we have nowadays, I'm really afraid of what the dictatorship really can be nowadays. And there's another aspect, Andrei, that I would like to raise, that is the duplicity in the language of the European institutions. They are always saying that they are really for human rights and very respectful of every kind of conventions. But when we look at the sanctions that the European Union imposes against many countries in the world, they say also that they fully respect humanitarian aspects of it, and that normal people do not suffer from it, but perhaps only the people in the government that are targeted, or big companies that are targeted by sanctions. But they do never talk about consequences for normal people that exist contrary to what they are maintaining. Is that correct? You are a specialist, as you just mentioned, on health issues, as a lawyer specialized on health issues. So how do you analyze this effect of EU sanctions on third countries?
Thank you, Fernand, for this question. We had a beautiful seminar on this. Not so beautiful because the facts were alarming. We had a special rapporteur from the United Nations on effect of sanctions, and we presented hard data from medical journals that the sanctions actually cause more than 500,000 human deaths each year, which is worse than the effects of armed conflicts. How it happens? Theoretically, medical equipment or medical drugs should be exempted from sanctions, but in real life they are not, because sometimes it is not possible to deliver them, or it is not possible to pay them, and in the end the people just don't have them. And it was very well accepted from the embassies and the people from these countries which were affected or are afraid of being affected, because the human toll is terrible. It is not targeting the politicians or armed forces. It is targeting the sick, the elderly, mothers, children. Infant deaths are the worst part of this all.
I think this is really frightening, because it shows how different the official kind of approach of presenting things are from the realities in the field. I mean, it's deeply shocking. And also what we discussed now with the euro and sanctions and so on, it's a problem, because we as European politicians, we want actually a European Union that observes human rights, that is absolutely not infringing with our privacy and respects its citizens. And we see that evolutions go into a very different direction. So we have, on the one hand, we have to defend our electors and their interests and then try to improve the European institutions. And on the other hand, we are sitting here as a very small minority, and the big European parties, they are just heading on with these kind of policies. So it is a little bit frustrating. Now, from the personal point of view, how do you live this? I can tell you that for me it's a challenge every day, because on the one hand I believe in European cooperation. I think that we need a European Union for economic reasons and for other reasons, and on the other side we see that the whole project risks to go completely wrong for the time being. So from your point of view, André and Rada, how do you react to this? How do you see your chances, your opportunities as a politician to help working for a Europe that we can, with good conscience, present to our voters and say, well, this is something that we can still defend?
I think the realities are on our side, because the world is changing. We see it not only in the mistrust in the current elites, we see it worldwide. I think that people want politics back to their nation state, to their interests, which are located where they are, and not this kind of centralization so far from them, be it in Brussels, maybe the next world government will be in New York. So a lot of people are really not buying this narrative anymore, because we are real Europeans. We are one of the founders of this civilization. If this kind of European Union wants to go a different way, it doesn't mean that our identities and our value in this system is diminished. No, nevertheless, all the more we will be fighting for a real Europe.
But you also have elections now in Bulgaria, so I suppose that this might also be a subject in the electoral campaign. In Bulgaria, what is public opinion nowadays on the European Union, on the subject that you mentioned, more national identity, less integration perhaps, for your party and for the elections that are upcoming?
Yes, it's interesting you mentioned that, because as a country that came from behind the Iron Curtain in the beginning of the 90s, the dreams and hopes of our citizens was to become part of the free-minded and also free economy, which nowadays we see it's everything else but free in the European Union. So there is a very recent study from Eurobarometer on this topic, what percentage of people support the current course. So 45% support this European Union, 45% are very critical, and 10% are undecided.
Well, that promises for the election. So good luck. I don't know what is coming out of that. And for you, André, how do you live this reality, this permanent contradiction that we live here between very high ideals, very idealistic projection of what we should do, and the reality that we experience here in Strasbourg this week? So how can we deal with this?
For me, it is sad and frustrating, because I was a believer in European Union, in European values. I was voting for entry to EU in 2004. I was studying European law. I was really interested in the project. But now I'm seeing that it is driven into a hellhole. It is not working. It is a big cause of the leadership. And the only thing which we can do is to raise our voice, which is what we are actually doing. I will be taking the sanctions issue to the Committee for Health. And I got a promise that I will at least get a speaking time, perhaps not a vote, but at least speaking about the topics, so the public will be able to see is the only way how to repair the European Union before it collapses.
I would also, we have, and maybe we can finish with this subject, but I think it's something very important. That's the role of the media. Because in the old days, I know when I was young, media was something that there were big struggles in that, and the newspapers had very different views, and you could bring your point of view, and then there was a discussion, and it was quite an aggressive sometimes atmosphere, one newspaper attacking another one, and so on. Nowadays, I have the feeling, at least in my country, you can interchange them. It's always the same. It's the European narrative. You have only one story, and if you don't agree, well, bad luck, but your place is not in the newspaper. And we need, I think, very much free media and courageous media in order to give the people back democracy, so that they have a place to discuss, that we can really change things and so on. And I feel a little bit betrayed, that's my personal feeling, by our media, which are actually only reproducing the narrative of the European Commission. Now, that is my very personal view, and also influenced, of course, by my experience in my own country. But you have, with the past of Bulgaria and the Czech Republic, with this communist media who have done that during communist times, and it was the party narrative. Have they learned? Are they now more open? Are they pluralistic now as media, or are they doing what they have been doing during communist times?
I think the citizens are very critical because they know what it means, the constant propaganda from the TV machine. But there is also financial interest in the establishment of the media, and this has been made very clear by some programs that were funded by the European Commission. There were revelations about that last year, that there were a lot of funds going on to support this kind of narrative in different programs through different NGOs, and this in particular affected my country with the amounts of millions. So there is the financial interest, which doesn't always coincide with the reality of the narrative, that maybe the journalist is professional, but is he fulfilling his real vocation as journalist, or is he following the paycheck of the European Commission?
And Andrei, for you, the media in your country, are they a real partner for you, or do you have also trouble to be heard?
We in the opposition are under constant attack from the media, and what is very sad, also from the public media, which should be impartial. We have actually seen that some of the people who were young propagandists under communist regime are now old propagandists employed by the current media. The same people, only different kind of propaganda. We have a president who has been a most eager soldier for the Warsaw Pact, now is the most eager soldier for NATO and Western values. So, well, some people don't change under any regime, but fortunately there are some people who still keep their values, and for them we are doing politics.
That is very, very impressive, because I'm also very much troubled by the censorship kind of attitudes that we have now with the Digital Services Act and Democracy Shield. All these instruments that are introduced and are really, I think, threatening our democracy and not fighting for our democracy. I consider them to be a threat, actually. But so we have work, I think, the three of us and many other colleagues, and right. I'm looking forward to do that and together with you to fight for a free Europe, for democratic Europe, a Europe as it should be, protecting citizens and not frightening us. So I think that we have a lot of things to do. Thank you very much, Rada, and thank you, Andrei, for joining me here today, and so we continue together our fight for a better Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.